This is undeniably the worst specialized status build you will have ever come across. Cobbled together with a mishmash of parts from an absolute piece of shit felt mountain bike build, and finished to a somewhat rideable state through sheer impatience. This build and its first ride are an absolute ode to my favorite David Freiberger quote, "Don't get it right, just get it running." With a heavy-handed reliance on electrical tape to get this thing up and going, namely electrical tape shim to keep the seat post somewhat in place, along with electrical tape for cable management, and a fork that is 20 millimeters too short. Even with all that working against it, the bike still rode along fine, and if I do say so myself, kind of rips. Now, I know for some of you, the idea of haphazardly and crudely finishing a project is a recipe for having to redo work, spend extra money, and ultimately have an inferior product for a while. But for me, getting that first ride out of the way with a new project acts as a nucleation point to start picking away at little bits at a time, instead of getting overwhelmed by the cost and task list of getting everything I want in the end. One piece at a time is the frugal tinkerer's way. Eagle-eyed of you might see the two changes of this bike that happened off camera. I'm going to tell you about those. We're going to do a little bit more. Welcome to this week's installment of Tinker Tuesday. So, second, because the first is already done, but I'll tell you about that very shortly, is the fact that there's now the appropriate sized dropper post in here. But for my height, this is all the way into the frame. I actually don't know if that's going to affect where the actuator is with the cable being installed. And it is still just, I've got a little bit of bend in my leg, but it's definitely more than maybe I would like for it to be. So I just want to shim this one up, 210 millimeter post down, about 10 millimeters. I might have to do another 10 depending on if the cable gets bound up or not, and if this needs to come up just that little bit more. But I'm going to start with 10 and go from there. Okay, this is supposed to be pretty easy. The last time I did this, I did it with it in the bike, which actually, you know what? I should find my shims. There we go. So 10 millimeter reduction. That's pretty much exactly where I would want that to be. Also, cable routed and dropper working without there being anything impeding it. So I'm going to continue on with the subject of internal cable routing, get this inside the frame, and I'm gonna change the rear brake. I'm not gonna run these Diors. I've got some SLXs that I'm gonna swap to, get that all inside the frame as well. So there's probably nothing on this earth more uninteresting to watch than someone struggling with internal cable routing, but it's made just like a little bit more tolerable with the internal cable routing tool from Park Tool. I also put this foam over the cables and the brake hose because I know how much you guys hate it when my bikes are making noise on POV runs. I did that for you. I'm just that kind of guy. But thankfully this part of the video is done. The internal cable routing is done. Like I said, I'm swapping out these single piston Shimano Dior brakes for some single piston SLXs. It's basically just a swap between the brakes that are on the heap. And while I had stuff off of the handlebars on the worst status ever, and I was already cannibalizing the heap for parts, I felt like I would just steal the stem and bar from that bike as well to make the status, I don't know, maybe a little bit better. A handlebar and stem swap, to which when we go to the riding footage of this bike, you'll see did not make the cut. I actually swapped to the 35 millimeter diameter bar and stem that was on the Poseidon Norton. What can you do?
Big drift. The second one is good for sueys, so let's do one. Yeah. Nose bob. Nose bob. Nose bob. Corner. Jump these rocks. Slogging this. You gotta jump from this berm in. And And
now, in an effort to stifle any of the comments or possibly open up the door for someone to be like inexplicably cruel to you in the replies of a comment that you may have already made, yes, despite my efforts in trying to keep the noise down on this by adding some, foam to the cables and hoses on this thing, it still was making some noise. I actually think it came down to the headset being a little bit loose, and that was where the noise was coming from. Since that riding footage, I've actually had to like straighten the bars out on this thing, and I added a little bit more headset preload. The last ride I was on, it was significantly quieter. So, yeah, I know it makes noise. Let's talk about some other stuff. At the beginning of this episode, I made the very bizarre editorial decision to mention that there was 2 things changed from the last time you saw this bike to when this episode starts, and said that the second was the dropper post, and have yet to mention what that first one was. There hasn't really been a great time to bring it back up, and I haven't given myself an opportunity in anything I've shot or edited to get back to it, so I'm just gonna do it now. It's just that the fork it's the proper travel now. It's the proper axle to crown length. I just had my buddy Andrew at Granite Suspension increase the travel of this RockShox fork from 140 millimeters to 160 millimeters. If you're interested in knowing how that's done, well, you're gonna love the next 30 seconds of this. Welcome to Gear Gab. So this fork began life at 140 millimeters of suspension travel equipped with this 140 millimeter air shaft. Andrew replaced this 140 millimeter air shaft with one that is 20 millimeters longer. That's 160 millimeters. Well, 160 millimeters of travel. I don't know how long this actually is. I didn't measure it. Thus, when completed, puts this fork at 160 millimeters of travel. The travel that this Status 160 is supposed to have on it. So now the bottom bracket is at the proper bottom bracket drop, or bottom bracket height, if you will. And the head tube angle is also at the correct spot. Very slack. Also, that means the stack is at the right spot. And also, thanks for entering this segment of Gear Gab. You'll probably also note the really cool kind of like custom touches that I've added to this thing, just to like, if someone sees it and I'm not around, they can see how quirky and fun and cool I am, with the leopard print chainstay, the leopard print stripes on the newly 160 millimeter fork. And let's not forget just how cool the electrical tape cable management system looked. I wanted to make it permanent, so I just painted it, and now it's always there. Yeah. And last weekend I decimated the rear wheel that was on this thing and replaced it with just one of the wheels that the Pro Shop had there, which has a loose spoke already. Wow, sweet. Glad I caught that right now. Coincidentally, this is basically a matching wheel to the front that's on there, so I guess that's fun. There's just one more thing that I want to change on this bike as it sits in this episode of Tinker Tuesday. And, from there, we can pretty well just do like a review of the setup, talk about it some more, and just feature it in future videos a little bit more than we could before, because it was a bit of a basket case. Now it's about as good as what you could buy just a stock Status. I feel like I would almost just put it on that level. So just that seat needs to change to the best seat in the world, the Fabric Scoop.